Welcome back. You know, when you try and measure, we do polls all the time, but when you try and measure certain metrics, it seems like it depends on who you ask. And one of them is poverty. I don't think many people realize that the United States measures poverty different than most other industrialized democracies. I bet you also didn't know that if we use the same metrics that those other countries did employ, the number of people that we consider poor in the U.S. would be increased by half. I'm talking about 46 million jumping up to nearly 70 million. The result here, well, it's a picture of a more prosperous America than actually exists. And I think a lot of us down deep believe that more people than just a few are really struggling. And more importantly, the poor, who could probably benefit from assistance, they're being left out here because I don't think many people or a lot of Americans realize just how many of them there are. It's an issue that's highlighted in the American Prospect's most recent edition, the poverty issue. It's an article included called Misleading Poverty, and it's along with several other measuring other fascinating pieces, including an award-winning article on the country's poorest countries, vividly portraying the challenges faced by the other, quote, other America, as Michael Harrington famously called it, if you remember, in that groundbreaking book of the same name 50 years ago. Now, Miles, you're the president of the American Prospect. Why'd you guys do the issue?
You know, it seems like the 50 years after Michael Harrington wrote this book that really put poverty on the national agenda. It was right after he wrote it that Lyndon Johnson took the tour and declared the war on poverty, that Robert Kennedy took a very famous tour through the South and saw abject poverty in Mississippi, and everyone said, this cannot happen. This cannot be America. So it seemed interesting 50 years later to say, how are we faring on these issues? And in many respects, things have gotten better. It's a facile to say, oh, it's worse now.
Because unlike like Murrow's Harvest of Shame or Kennedy winning the Appalachia, you don't see that amount of abject poverty anymore, but it's not that far removed, right?
Right. There's less abject poverty, hunger because of food stamps that are, you know, 60 million people in America are getting them. Medicare prevented seniors from dropping into, you know, medically caused poverty. So a lot of the pieces that were in the war on poverty worked. They didn't work nearly as well as they hoped to have worked. But what's interesting is that when Harrington wrote the book, he talked about 7 pockets of poverty. That is, people who were left behind by an otherwise prosperous nation. What's happened now is that the economic insecurity that so many people in the middle class and working class feel has become much more widespread. The statistic that amazes me is that the federal government has a category called near poor, which is the poverty rate for a family of 3 is $24,000. Near poor is up to double that, so up to $48,000 for a family of 3. If you measure that, 103 million Americans, over a third of the nation, are poor or near poor and in need of services, and that's a stunning figure. That is worse than almost any other industrialized nation and worse than some non-industrialized nations.
Yet you see, Miles, state after state cutting not only services, but also nationally you're hearing Republicans, and not even on the slide, talking about cutting several safety nets. What surprises me is there isn't as much of a backlash or a public outcry over this in a lot of areas in this country. Do you think it's because they don't realize how many people are just, you know, one bad break away from being, you know, literally without choices? Or do you think people say, I got enough of my own problems, I'm not worried about that bottom whatever population, even if it's bigger than they imagine?
Yeah, I mean, I think that you know, you would like to have, if you're an advocate for eliminating poverty, as I am, much more public outcry, much more grassroots indignation than we have.
But is it because they don't know, or is it because they're worried about themselves?
They're worried about themselves. Families are in every family now. Two parents are working, if there are 2 parents in the family, or 1 if it's a single parent family. Just sort of figuring out ways to get by and to try to get ahead. It's one of the in the articles about Owsley County, Kentucky, in the American Prospect. It's a wonderful story about a young white family who has just tried everything, from opening up a T-shirt store to going back to community college to getting a job as a nurse's aide, you know, to just try to get ahead. And each time they get a little bit ahead, a car breaks down, a family member gets sick, a lost job, and they go slip right back into it. And they're just living on the edge in so many ways. And I think as a matter of public policy, it has to this has to be on the agenda, not at the expense of the middle class, because I do think that there is a real issue about whether America's middle class can survive. But what needs to happen is the middle class needs to be able to expand and continue and thrive, and there need to be pathways into it for people who have never, who have not gotten into it.
And
we have the resources to do it. Yes, we can. We absolutely have the resources to do it. There needs to be a public will and a public investment and a real commitment to do it. And I do think that the, you know, some of the conservatives saying all we have to do is cut government services and everything will be fine, are going to run up smack dab in some of those states where they try to turn down the Medicaid. You know, funds from the federal government into a real firestorm.
And I also think from dealing with some of the hospitals and what they're seeing come in the ERs with people that they never saw before for just minimum care, it's in the national interest to do it. People ought to be real careful if you keep going down this road how many people are going to be impacted. All right.